It's a pleasure to share with you some thoughts about a subject that I would characterize as somewhat nebulous and somewhat challenging to clearly identify. And the topic that I've been asked to share some thoughts on is really around the importance in the commercial setting of sow lifetime productivity. And so what we'll be doing here is first to start from a business standpoint, what does it mean and what do we measure and how do we measure it? Because that's the fundamental part of our business in many cases. Secondly is to clarify what are we really measuring, and then to share with you some industry trends primarily around sow productivity, and then look at some suggestions to improve lifetime productivity. What are some focus areas that we can work on? And then also to share with you a deeper dive looking at our data from the Western operations, which represents 340,000 sows managed in 8 different states. So I'll give you a kind of an overview and share with you how some of those results are being used in our operations. And then at the same time, talk about sow productivity is really about reasons why the female leaves the herd and try to clarify that a little bit more with some data. So to begin with, when we think about sow production commonly as an industry, I think we tend to focus in 2 general areas. We talk about pigs per sow per year, and we talk about pre-wean mortality. In my opinion, neither one of them are very good indicators of sow performance. In fact, in recent survey work that would suggest that PSY doesn't hit the top 10 key indicators in cost control, and pre-wean mortality is an artifact because the way we often measure it. And incentive programs based on that, generally it improves, but throughput doesn't change. And so I think what we're continuing to move toward more, at least in our operation, is pigs weaned per mated female, as well as looking at wean pig cost, and then the deeper dive. It's not something that you can look at routinely, but on more of a quarterly, semi-annual basis, is look at pigs per sow lifetime. Let me begin with looking at the financial information. And when I share this information, we have a process we call sensitivities. What is an incremental change worth in an organization? So for instance, today, with corn moving 25 cents a bushel, soybean meal is expected to move at about $20 a bushel, and that moves the cost of production about $1.60 a hundredweight, or about $4.39. And for Smithfield, that's about $75 million per quarter of corn price. Now, those of you in the room moving from $5 to $7 corn, even my Iowa State colleagues could quickly calculate how many quarters are in that 3. So it's a big, big move, and you can see the financial impact. And so what you see here is the relative effect on pigs weaned per sow farrowed is a tenth is equivalent to 15 cents a hundredweight or 40 cents a pig. And the relationship is also kind of interesting. A half a pig is equivalent to about 1% in finishing mortality, or 1 pig is equivalent to 25 cents a bushel when you look at relative effects from a sensitivity standpoint. So the clear message for us to continue to lower cost of production, we've got to do some things on improving performance. So when we look at the factors that influence cost of production, we've spent some time in our organization. Frankly, the swine industry is overwhelmed with data, isn't it? You say, what really is important? And you look at lots of different indicators of success. We struggled with that same question. So using some statistical analysis procedures, stepwise regression, what we did is said, if we set feed aside and go through and predict what are the key variables that influence it, and can we get our results where we can focus on fewer, bigger, more important things that might be relative to other indicators. So in our estimation, these 4 components give you a correlation coefficient of 0.97, suggesting that 97% of the cost of variation, when you exclude feed, can be accounted for by those 4 activities, listed in order of those importance. And so this one's starting up here at about 31, 32%. So the common message here is obviously that one of the single drivers in our business today is wean pig cost. Now, a few years ago, we started down the path working with the National Pork Producers Council on sow lifetime productivity. And through a series of different meetings, this definition was derived for lifetime productivity is really the total number of quality pigs produced during the productive lifetime of a female, and the key word begins when she becomes breed eligible. So that's when, so in essence, we're going to be looking at the retention of gilts or P0 animals in the herd that obviously stay in and give higher productivity until she leaves the herd. So when we look at these results, just as a quick calculation to show what improving lifetime productivity means, and assuming today with about $8 corn and some selection cost, probably costs us about $350 to produce a replacement gilt. And you go through those exercises and you look at what does it really cost to produce a gilt. The cost of that gilt production continues to move up, and so the aspect is how do you leverage the cost of that replacement gilt. And so assuming that we call her out after 3.5 litters and she's weaning 10.5, the lifetime productivity is about 36, and that breeding cost per pig is $9.52. So if we're able to get, theoretically, one more litter, we pick up another 10 pigs, the cost per replacement goes down $2 per weaned pig. Now keep in mind, $2, as I show you weaned pig cost in a minute, it gets to be a big number as a percent of total. And assuming, let's say we can't do that just for the same cost, let's say we add another $50 to do that development for some reason, whatever it might be, boar exposure, all those activities of gilt development, we can see about, we might give half of that away. But at the same time, the message is the more we can get in the way of weaned pig throughput out of the sow, the lower that breeding stock cost is per weaned pig. And so looking at these particular numbers, and many of you recognize AgriStats and appreciate the participation with Greg in the back here today as well. We routinely look at these numbers, and AgriStats, I think Greg would tell you it's probably about 40-50% of the U.S. industry. So it's really a good sample size. And what I've done here is just simply show the average, the top 25, the best of class, and the worst of class for these primary variables. So if you look at the average industry today, weaning 10.4, but the best is 11.6, the worst is about 8.5, 3 pig difference, 30% difference in throughput. And when you look at that from the number of pigs per mated sow per year, the average is about 24, top 25 about 25.7. But it's interesting when you look at the best and worst, there's 10 pig difference between the top and the bottom for that given period of time. And when we come over and look at weaned pig cost, average weaned pig cost at about $34. The top 25 is about $27. But look again at the difference between the bottom and the top. $20 range in weaned pig cost. So if we could take this average and move it down $2, that could be a potential 6% reduction in our cost of production if we were able to accomplish that. So also one of the things the National Pork Board has done with AgriStats is created some industry productivity projects showing annual rates. What we've tried to do in this particular slide is to say, what is the slope of the change and what is the correlation of those numbers? And so when you look at these results, it suggests to us that litters per sow per year has remained pretty flat. Number weaned, I don't think that would surprise anybody. We got more pigs than we've ever seen, and it's changing at the rate of about 0.22 pigs per litter, a very high R square, and we're weaning about 1/1700 more of those. At the same time, pigs mated per sow per year is going up at about 0.44 per year with a high R square. But replacement values are ranging in this 50%. So in the truest sense, if we're going to improve sow lifetime productivity, we've got to continue to say, how do we change our replacement rates? And also, interesting to note, sow mortality is pretty flat to a negative slope in potentially. Okay, so those two numbers are concerning and go just diametrically opposed to what we want to do in improving lifetime productivity. So when we talk about lifetime productivity, to me it boils down to two fundamental aspects. And it's pretty elementary, but I think we got to just focus where it's at. One is the sow's got to stay longer. The longevity's got to be there, and we've got to get more out of her during that period of time. That's pretty simple, we know that, but then we say, why don't we do that, right? And so what are the areas that affect that? The number one area that I think is a function of our weakness as a system is gilt development methods. Number two is the gilt selection and utilization rates. You know, we talk about these things, but are they measured? Do we know what those numbers are? And what methods are used to derive those? And then female retention, or in the truest sense, the depletion of body stores. So we have sows that have no heat, which in many cases is a function of depletion of body reserves. And then it gets to the throughput measures of more weaned, and then increasing farrowing rates, in essence, less non-productive days and more litters, and then improving sow livability. Now, all those are pretty straightforward. It clearly shows it's a complex problem. And then when you add the aspects of seasonality to that, and you try to manage through that period of time, because when sow lifetime productivity is the worst is usually when you're infusing a bunch of females in, trying to make sure we're hitting breed target. So the challenges with lifetime productivity, number one, it's not routinely assessed or monitored. Number two, it's not common on most record-keeping systems. It's not part of our vocabulary. It's not something we routinely look at. And there's limited benchmarking availability on the subject. So if it's important, we got to start figuring out how to get some standardization, how do we do the comparison, and then how do you put the improvements together. And then the complicating factor, as you use more parity segregation systems, it increases data collection accuracy and integrity. So in the truest sense, you have to look at that as a system. So if you have a P1 hooked to a couple of P2 farms, that becomes the system indicator, not because obviously that P1 is a component of that whole project. Now, historically, we've looked at numbers that go back a number of years where we look at what percent of the gilts are having 3 litters. And what you see in this data is a summary of a pod in Nevada, Missouri on 60,000 sows. Each of these lines is one given sow farm. Sow farm range between 2,500 and 7,500. And what I want to show you is just the simple range of 50% to 66% of the females having 3 litters. Now, that would suggest that there's 16% difference between the bottom and the top, or another way of looking at that, when just in this one pod of sows, under the same management, same feed, comparable housing, there's 24% difference in longevity. And the question to many of us is, do we look at it, do we measure it, and how are we trying to overcome this variation? And so if you take that data and drill into it a little bit more, and you take the top 3 farms in that data set, and the bottom 3 in that data set, and you look at what percent go from P0s to P1s, you look at those differences, and then going from P0s to P2s, and P0s to P3s, the point simply is the biggest single problem we have is retention of P1s and zeros. And so all these others stay relatively the same, but the difference between the bottom and the top in this group of sow farms is how well they're utilizing moving from P0 to P1 females. Now, another piece of data I'll share with you from our Western operations. This represents 93 sow farms with a lifetime productivity of about 34 with a standard deviation of 11. Okay, 11. When you look across these, some of these farms are as low as 22, some are as high as 55. The average is in this 34 range. So you see a normal distribution, but the point is there's a heck of a lot of variation in a system across this organization. And what's interesting, it's not just by location, it's variation within location that adds to that challenge. So coming back to the Missouri pod, this is the lifetime productivity across those sow farms in Missouri. And you can see a range of 24 to 45. Again, the average is probably in this range of about 35 to 36. But again, somewhere in the area of 30% difference between the bottom and the top. This happens to be a big sow farm. This happens to be a little about the same size sow farm. So it's not sow farm. It's about how well people are managing and utilizing the gills. Another example pointing to data from our Utah operations. That's 75,000 sows. Oklahoma is, in this particular data set, is about 40,000 sows. Looking at it by year, and you can see that sow lifetime productivity is going up with an R-square of 0.9. In Oklahoma, going up, the R-square is a little lower, but it's interesting, the slope of the line in those cases are both about the same, suggesting that we can improve lifetime productivity at the rate of about 2.5 pigs per year when we put focus on it. Now another one that when you take a piece of this data and you break it out by the distribution of the pigs coming from sows, it's interesting to note that 28% had less than 9 pigs. Or the other way is you have 42% of them having less than 19 pigs. You can see we have a nice bench across here. Don't have a lot in this 100 plus category, but the challenge is how do we lower this curve to push more sows into the sweet pocket? Now, what I've tried to do in this particular slide, it's a bit busy, but I hope it tells the story. What you see here is 12 months worth of data. In this data set, there's 186,000 sows that have been removed, and looking at the reason why they're removed and how does that relate to their lifetime number weaned. So the pink color is the lifetime productivity. So as an example, these 5 reasons, no heat, parity correction, failure to conceive, feet and legs, and this bugger known unknown here, those represent a total of 70% of the reasons animals are called. 20% is no heat, and those no heat animals have a lifetime productivity of 11. Those that we corrected for parity had the highest lifetime productivity of 69. So in essence, we're calling out productive animals that were probably older animals. And then you come across and look at these failure to conceive, feet and legs, and unknown are all in that 23 to 30 category. And then this dubious category called management, probably some decision that we need to clarify some more. But my point being is you've got your opportunity is back here in how do we make sure we minimize these, quote, no heat females. Now that's all sows, all parities. Now let me drill into that based upon P0s removed. Okay, so in essence, of that 186,000, there's about 39,000 of them that didn't have a litter. So why did those not have a litter? The biggest single reason was no heat, 52% of them. Failure to conceive was represented 17%, feet and legs 10%, and unknown 6%. So those 4 variables represented 85. So in essence, we all know that no heat means she could have had heat and we missed her, or she didn't cycle, but we were calling her no heat. So the biggest single reason for losing P0s is our inability to effectively detect a breedable estrus. Okay, so we have a $350 gilt, and now we're going to take somewhere in the area of, I think it's about 15% of them, and say, okay, they're go out the door, and you're going to take a discount because they weigh more, and then you spend all the money and time to get them in place. So the management opportunity is say, how do we suppress this part of our curve? And so I'll use this as an illustration to say, okay, let's bring it back within the entire operation, the same exact format, but this time it's laid out by parity, and lifetime productivity is going up here. So obviously the older sows are going to give more, but we know the associated challenges down here. But what we really got to keep in mind is that 35% are removed as P0s and P1s, lowering the sweet pocket on productivity. And what it's important to note here too is our most productive sows for lifetime productivity, you're going to be right in this range. So the more we can push into that older parity without dramatically influencing performance, the better our lifetime productivity will be. Now, this is an illustration of that particular process. In essence, saying, okay, what we want to do is suppress this, reduce the number that are called out as P1s and P0s. And what we'll do is say, okay, we want to lower this cull rate. Lower is still high, right? Because we probably need to be close to 5, but the differential is what I want you to really see, is the differential is taking this kind of worst case and saying 81%, moving it to 60%. What does that look like from a theoretical standpoint? And what you see is this curve here then is suppressed 5 percentage units. 5% change in that curve will give dramatic improvement in productivity in a system this size. And I'll show you that in weaned pig estimates. And then you see greater number of those moving through the parity. You see parity 2s go up. You see parity 3s go up. And you see the parity 4s are moving as well, and some on the 5s. Now, I think one of the challenges we've had historically is we kind of come out here and say, okay, we're going to draw a line in the sand and say she goes if she's over a certain parity, unless we need her for breeding or whatever the reason is, right? And there's usually yeah, but that comes with those kind of evaluations. And so the point of all this is to simply say to get more throughput, lifetime productivity. If we were to accomplish this theoretical change in our system, it would mean another 34,000 weaned pigs that would further lower our cost of production. Now, the next part of lifetime productivity is to recognize the seasonality of production. And we all see this, but sometimes when we look at the results of that, what you see here is the blue line represents 60,000 sows, the red line represents 75,000, and this is drawn on weeks of change. And we typically see this seasonality effects where we see the roller coaster of production, right? We wean fewer pigs due to summer breeds. Boom, de-boom. We do it in both pods. Boom, de-boom. And in this case, we're seeing less seasonality over here because of the focus. But the real takeaway of this dip costs us 4,000 pigs a week in that pod. And when we're short, we tend to underfill. And when we're long, we overfill, right? And so in essence, creating some additional sub-optimization challenges. And then in this smaller cell operation, we see this 2,000 to 3,000 pigs less a week being pushed out. So the real takeaway is that 8 to 12% reduction in weaned pigs due to summer breeds is what we routinely deal with, adding to our adding to our lifetime productivity associated challenges. And so part of the reason I think we see part of this is the way we plan our breeds. So to come back to what have we learned from this challenging area? The first lesson that I'd suggest to you is lifetime productivity is not commonly monitored or benchmarked. It's still new to us. I would suggest that many of us really don't know what those numbers are and haven't spent a lot of time analyzing the numbers because it's not something we routinely get spit out of our systems, do we? Because we're focused on PSY or pigs weaned or weaned pigs or weaned cost, and this piece is not particularly transparent to us in our evaluations. The other thing is sow lifetime variability is high under commercial conditions when you use sow farm as the single indicator. And so there's some pretty simple things to do to say, how do we standardize and do a better job of retention of P0s and 1s across a system of our size and scale. The other takeaway, it's possible to improve sow lifetime productivity at the rate of 2 to 2.5 pigs per year based upon the analysis that we've done in our Utah and Oklahoma businesses. Now it's gone from, I would characterize as inferior to reasonable, but there's a change by putting focus on it. And again, the greatest opportunity to improve lifetime productivity is to focus on retention of P0s and P1s and have them better prepared before they go in the system. And then the real takeaway is that by doing so, we'll lower our wean pig costs because we have less cost of our breeding stock into those females.